All right. Well, around 2,500 years ago, something amazing happened in Greece. And there was this sequence of people that somehow were born there and met each other and had this teacher student relationship that changed the future of civilization. It changed human history. And these kind of events don't happen very often, but this one was very special. And that was a man named Socrates had a student named Plato. And both of them were hugely influential and very intelligent. And then Plato had a student for many years named Aristotle. And Aristotle took the ideas and the methods that Plato taught him and just ran wild with it. Like he expanded human knowledge and human understanding and even the subjects, the areas of study that we have now. He created a whole universe of learning. He created a whole catalog of books and subjects and things that people could investigate and things that people could think about. And this list is, I try to write a lot of it down. I mean, he was amazing at zoology and studying marine animals and things like that. He wrote probably the first book on physics or one of the early books on physics. He was interested in meteorology and planetary astronomy, geology. He studied vision and light to some extent. He did some early chemistry, trying to understand the nature of materials. Some general biology, and that's just the scientific stuff. He also studied the nature of the human soul. He studied ethics and metaphysics, and just all kinds of topics. He invented formal logic, right? So like we're talking about a guy that invented logic. That alone is an insane accomplishment. And in light of all the other things he did, he's just a remarkable person. So I want to go over some of his key beliefs or some of his key ideas as they relate to physics and astronomy, and kind of differentiate him from Plato a little bit, and also compare and contrast some of his ideas with the way we think now. And it's tempting to see Aristotle as having a mind that's like ours, or having a viewpoint of the world that's like a modern scientific view. But you have to understand that this was so long ago. His way of viewing the world is very different than ours. So if you find some similarities, that's great, and you should acknowledge that. But you also need to understand that his reasons for studying these things and his methods and ways of understanding the world are quite different than ours. And so I want to try to highlight a few of those. So one big change that happened between Plato's philosophy and Aristotle's philosophy is the difference between the importance of the material world. So for Plato, the material world, like so the stuff around us that we see, is not so important because it's always changing and it's hard to understand the patterns, and there's just this kind of chaos in it. And he thought that it would make more sense to try to figure out the world by using rationality, by thinking your way through it, by trying to make sense of it with your brain. And Aristotle, his student, disagreed with this. And Aristotle's point was that we should understand the world through our senses, and that we should gain knowledge through experience. And that, basically, if you want to understand the nature of the world or the nature of the universe, you've got to make observations. And that attitude, I think we can relate to in science, right? The idea of making observations, of maybe not trusting our senses, but at least using our senses to try to make sense of things, right? Um, so one way that he was probably a lot different than the modern scientist is Aristotle didn't do any experiments, really. He didn't really do any, especially he didn't do any controlled experiments. So, and it's not that he wasn't smart enough to do it or that he didn't realize that it was an option. He probably did, but I think these type of experiments would have seemed pointless to Aristotle because his main goal was to discover the nature of things and how objects and how animals behave in their natural environment. So if you took an animal or you took an object out of its natural environment and created some kind of artificial experiment, um, he would understand that you can do that, but that would not have interested him. He didn't want to see how a fish would work if you took it out of the lake or out of the ocean and put it somewhere else. He was interested in seeing how the fish behaves in its natural environment and observing in its natural place. And along a similar lines, he wanted to understand the purpose of objects or the purpose of things. And he believed that everything has a purpose. So if you want to understand a dog, you need to understand the nature of a dog and the purpose of a dog. If you want to understand a rock, you need to get at the nature of what's the purpose of a rock. And that's something that's a very different idea than the way scientists think today. We don't believe that rocks have a particular purpose. They just exist, and we can study them, and we can do geology, but we don't try to find a purpose for the rock. So Aristotle's idea there was a little bit different. A few more kind of key points. And I think this one's pretty interesting. He denied that there could have been a beginning to the universe. So Aristotle believed that the universe was eternal. And there were a variety of reasons that he believed this, but different people throughout history have argued that there was a beginning to the universe, and Aristotle firmly believed that there was not, and that it's always existed. He also, interestingly, didn't believe that empty space was possible. So he didn't think that it was possible to remove all the material from space and have what you would call a vacuum. And that type of idea actually influenced people later, and it took a while for some scientists to actually understand that you could create empty space by removing all the air and other matter from it. Aristotle was opposed to the ancient Greeks who believed in atoms. So there was this group of people called the Atomists, and they argued that basically there were these you could chop something into pieces, and eventually you would get to kind of a building block that couldn't be broken down anymore, and that the whole universe was built out of these little pieces called atoms. And famously, the current model for the way the world is built is like atoms. It's like an atomistic type world. And so in that area, a modern chemist or a modern physicist would disagree with Aristotle in that area. He also believed that the Earth was a sphere and gave some good reasons for it. And that's actually related to the homework that I'm going to give this week. And so to finish this, let's talk about Aristotle's kind of structure of the world, structure of the universe. He thought that the Earth was at the center of the universe and that it was not rotating. He believed that there were four main elements: earth, water, air, and fire. And earth was the heavy material that would sink to the center, and that water was lighter than earth, so it would rise to the surface. That air was even lighter, and so if you bubbled air underwater, it would go up, and then fire was the lightest substance. So, for example, if you create a fire in the atmosphere, the fire goes up, it doesn't fall down. So heavier objects like earth and water go down, and lighter objects like air and fire go up. And then beyond the atmosphere, where there's air and fire, beyond that point of the Earth, and when I say the Earth, that kind of means two different things, right? There's the planet Earth, and then there's the substance Earth, which is the solid stuff that's here. So maybe that's confusing, but that's the way it is. When you get to the outer circle of that fire that's part of our globe, what's beyond that is kind of the sphere that includes the moon. And the moon creates this kind of boundary between where we are on the Earth, and this outer area that contains the stars and the planets. And for Aristotle, there was a fifth element that was weightless and transparent, so you could see through it, and it was like kind of perfect, and it had this special crystalline structure that everything outside, everything past the moon, was built of this perfect material that allowed for these perfect circular motions of the stars and the planets. And beyond that, he believed that there was actually a god for each planetary motion. So for the stars to move, there was actually a god controlling the motion of the stars. And for each planet, there was a god controlling the motion of that planet. And he saw those motions as being perfect and uncorrupted, and that they were made of this special material that doesn't exist on Earth. So you can see that Aristotle's attitudes about what takes place here, things like earth and air and water, kind of resonate with us, right? It sounds kind of like he's talking about solid and liquid and gas and scientific terms like that. But when he starts talking about outer space, things get kind of crazy. He pictures these shells of crystal. So there's these like crystalline shells that are see-through that are controlling the rotation of these different planets and different stars. And he believes that the gods are controlling that, right? So there's this interesting mixture of what we would consider natural science by making observations and studying things and seeing the way they actually are, and combined with this type of spiritual beliefs that the gods are controlling all of it. So you can see in the ancient times, a lot of these ways of thinking were not like distinct quite yet. So I'm going to stop there. Aristotle, super important, super interesting. If you're interested, I would strongly recommend reading some of the stuff he wrote and trying to make sense of it, and doing a little more research about him. Very, very cool person.